Very important to understand the main purpose, the wisdom, the maqasid overall, because these rules have to do with marriage, to do with women, to do with men, husband, wife, to do with rights and responsibilities, to do with children, inheritance. What we find is that in Islam, the family unit itself is central to the aim of Islam. So, they say maqasid al-Sharia, they say the objectives or the universal principles or goals of Sharia are, preserving life, preserving deen, preserving wealth, lineage, nasab, so they mention 5 universal goals. They also say preserving lineage, meaning preserving the family unit and biological identity of individuals. But the family unit actually preserves all of the maqasid of Sharia. All of the maqasid of Sharia is also preserved in the family unit. In the family unit, the biological identity is preserved, the lineage, the nasab. Deen itself is preserved in the family unit. Some ways, the wealth, proportion of wealth is also preserved in the family unit. Life is also protected in the family unit. So the family unit, or the structure of a family through marriage, is a key component of the Islamic guidance, vision for society. So this is number 1. Number 2 is that each of these rules surrounding the family take into consideration the particular nature of men and women. They take into consideration the particular differences of men and women. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who created us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the unique capacities of men and women. He knows the differences and He knows the similarities. There's nobody who knows the differences, the similarities, the capacities, the capabilities of men and women more than our own Creator, more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us rules and guidance which is perfect for both men and women. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't treat them unequally. Islam doesn't treat men and women unequally. But it treats them in a way that fulfills justice, fairness, equity, according to the differences between men and women, according to their different capacities, according to their biological differences, according to their emotional differences, according to their physical differences, psychological differences. So the rules of Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created for the benefit of mankind, for the benefit of our dunya and akhirah, for our salvation, for our personal development, so that we reach the highest positions as human beings, which is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to safeguard our hereafter, and to live a moral life in this world. This can only be achieved through the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is given in accordance to who the rules are applying to. So for women and men, generally the rules are same. Men and women have to pray. Men and women have to fast. Right? Those things that are mostly haram for men are also haram for women. Few differences here and there. The general rules are the same, but in particular circumstances where the differences need to be recognized, acknowledged, nurtured, the differences need to be acknowledged for there to be a just guidance or rule for either man or woman in their particular roles or due to their particular capacities or responsibilities. Without that, if you have just blind, everything is same, that will only do injustice. That will only do injustice. Just like we don't have the same rules for a 5-year-old child and an adult. or even an 80-year-old man and a 7-year-old child, there's differences even within the same gender. Similarly, there's differences between the two genders. It will be unfair, unequal, unjust to expect the same rules for man and the same rules for woman in every single aspect. So we have to really understand this and keep this in mind. Secondly, these rules that acknowledge these differences, of course, some Muslims do exploit these rules, do abuse these rules, use them unjustly to oppress women, or to take away some of their rights, or to give them a lower status or something. This happens, this we have to acknowledge. It happens, but this is not what Islam promotes. This is not what Islam says. This is not Sharia. What Islam says is that men and women in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala generally are equal in terms of ibadah, reward, and things like that. Generally they're equal, but there are some rules and regulations that acknowledge, recognize, and are geared towards the unique differences between men and women. And a lot of this you will find in marriage, in the family structure, in the roles and responsibilities. This should be straightforward for most people to understand, for believers to acknowledge this and to accept this. This should be straightforward. But due to the time we live in, due to the society we live in, due to the external dominant values, if you like, even the Muslims begin to question some of these assigned rules or roles and responsibilities. So some things, you cannot avoid, like the obligation for the man to provide. In a family, it's fard, it's an obligation, it's compulsory for the man to provide for the family, to earn, to work, to provide accommodation, to provide maintenance, to provide food. It's an obligation. The woman can also provide and work and do all those things, but it's not an obligation. That's an extra. It's voluntary if she wants. So these things are not going to change. These are clear differences because of the roles and responsibilities given to the man and the woman. First of all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose and gave that difference in responsibility to man and woman. Secondly, it's about fairness according to the capabilities, the burden. If the woman is expected to bear children, right? And then she's obliged to go and provide for the family as well. How would she do that? How would she do that? So that's just a small example. There are obvious differences that the Sharia or Islamic guidance takes into consideration and actually protects the differences, protects where it needs to be protected, it's protected. So this is for the protection of women. It's not to burden them. It's not an obligation for them to earn money. It's an obligation for the husband to provide. So these are basic, simple things. However, because of the dominant value system externally in the society we live in, where things are in terms of what is right, what is wrong, whose responsibility, who's right, how do we determine what is good, what is bad? The source of all that is me, the individual. The source of what we have in the West today, in the societies we live in, and that's, they've gone through certain historical developments, etc., changes, certain situations through history, but they've ended up where the human being, me, I, the individual, I determine what is right and wrong. There's no external standard, there's no external guidance, definitely not revelation for most people. Not necessarily most people, but for the system, for how the society is run. There's lots of people who believe in revelation, but in terms of how society is organized how the laws are made, how the values are promoted, it's to do with nothing to do with external information coming or external truths. It's to do with the human being individually, like self-referential. The source comes back to me. If I think today this is good, then this is good. Tomorrow, if I think this is bad, then this is bad. It's all up to me. My desires, my biases, my whims, my choice, whatever I think is good today, that is good. Whatever I think is wrong today is wrong today. And if you expand that to the society, basically the majority of society, whatever it deems good, acceptable, normal, that is what is good, acceptable, and normal. Whatever it deems harmful, bad, evil, that is what is evil, bad, and harmful. And this has resulted in what? It's resulted in a constant change in values. There's nothing fixed. Go 70 years back. 70 years ago, the things that were seen in society as good, normal, and other things that were seen as harmful or bad or immoral or unethical, these are completely changed now within the space of 50 years, 60 years, 70 years. And they will keep on changing. There's no fixed measurement, there's no fixed source, there's no fixed standards. So therefore, the number and variety of human opinion you have, that is the number and variety of rules and regulations that can come about on what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. Whose responsibilities is this? Whose rights, who has more rights or less rights? And therefore the same thing in marriage, the same thing in gender, role, responsibilities, that will be always changing. But that is impacting, obviously, in our communities as well. Young people see this, they've brought up in this, they grow up in this, and they are asking the same or similar questions. So it's really important to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will give rules and regulations that are best for you and me according to who we are. Whether it's adult, child, elderly, man, woman, father, son, each person has their role. Each person has their responsibility. And it's according to our capability. So the young people are facing many challenges. And one of the problems is, when it comes to this, it's not just the dominant culture outside, it's also the responses young people get when they ask imams questions on these issues about women's rights, about the role and status of women in Islam, about different rights in marriage, etc., or divorce. Sometimes the people that are answering the questions, they also drive people away, either because they're not fully aware of the rules, or they're not aware of the societal reality, the community, the society, the challenges, the pressures, or the change in context where to apply the rules. Sometimes people who are answering, they're not aware. So you have the external pressure, you have internal blockages or misrepresentation from some, not everybody, from some. And this leads to a confusing situation for our youth. And there are so many groups out there advocating to defend and support your views, whether as a woman, feminist movement, whether as something else. There's advocacy groups, rights groups everywhere who will point out that Islam is unjust here. Islam is unequal here, right? But unless we understand our purpose, unless we understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His infinite wisdom, His perfect knowledge, unless we understand what the purpose of Islam is, unless we understand these and then understand the rules, we will always be confused or not be able to answer the questions that the next generation has for us. So this is very important. So in terms of the main rule in this verse, is that the widows have to wait, a waiting period of 4 months and 10 days. Why? the question may come, why is it that a widow has to wait that long? You know, the husband's passed away. If it was a divorce, she just has to wait 3 menstrual cycles, right? Roughly, give or take 3 months or just under, but 3 menstrual cycles. With the widow, why is it that she has to wait 4 months and 10 days? Again, this question will come up. The scholars have answered this. Most of the scholars gave the following answers. First of all scholars say, look, whatever the wisdom is, we don't follow the rules and regulations simply based on the wisdom, simply based on the reason. The first reason we follow the rules is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded it. So that has to be the foundation. Regardless of whether you understand the wisdom or the benefit behind that rule, we follow that rule because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded it. He alone has the authority to command what to do and what not to do. We trust in Allah. If we knew, if we knew Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala properly, if we understood His mercy, His perfect knowledge, the fact that He wants good for you, the fact that He loves you, the fact that He is full of justice, if we knew that properly, these questions would never arise. We would never say, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala command us to do this? We would automatically know it's for our own benefit, it's for our own good. Young children, when they're raised by their mothers or fathers, usually they ask questions, they'll ask a lot of questions, why? But usually if they're brought up in a healthy household, they don't doubt their mother's intention in terms of bringing them up and looking after them and caring for them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is much more merciful than a mother to the child. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is much, much more, infinitely more merciful than a mother is to her child. If we knew Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we would not ask why or question or anything like that. But nevertheless, the scholars said, look, it's a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we submit. That's the meaning of Islam, Muslim. In addition to that, they said, first of all, one of the wisdom is to wait 4 months and 10 days, is to establish that there is no pregnancy. That there is no pregnancy in, the woman is not pregnant, the widow is not pregnant. This is important to establish this. As the hadith says, and the reason why they say 4 months, 10 days, the scholars said, around that time, it's very clear whether a woman is pregnant or not. This is in the days before ultrascans and pregnancy tests and things like that. But in those days, 4 months, 10 days is a good enough length of time whereby a woman, if she is pregnant or not, is very clearly, in most cases, is very clearly visible or very clearly identifiable. So some of them also use this hadith that's in the Sahihain, Bukhari and Muslim, where the Prophet Ibn Mas'ud saying, إِنَّ خَلْقَ أَحْدِكُمْ يُجْمَعُ فِي بَطْنِ أُمِّهِ 40 يوما نطفة ثم يكون علقة مثل ذلك ثم يكون مضغة مثل ذلك ثم يبعث إليه الملك فينفخ فيه الروح. On the authority of Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anh, he states that the creation of a human being is put together in the womb of his mother in 40 days in the form of a seed, and next he becomes a clot of thick blood for a similar period, and next a morsel of flesh for a similar period. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends an angel who is ordered to breathe life. So these 40 days, 80, and another 40 is 120. It's roughly 4 months. So some of the scholars said, look, because that development takes place within that time period, it becomes clearer and the ruh is breathed in, that the movement of the child becomes more or clearer, if you like, in the pregnancy. But I mean, this is just something that some of the scholars said. But today, again, you see, people say well, you don't have to wait 4 months, 10 days. You can simply do a pregnancy test and just determine it within an hour, right? So what's the answer to that? The answer to that is this wisdom here that the scholars have mentioned, that is to determine whether she's pregnant or not, is not the only wisdom or reason why that rule is given. It's not the only sole reason. There are other wisdoms and reasons why this rule is there. So we can't just say, okay, now we can determine it within 2 days, khalas. No, because Allah didn't say that is the only reason why He's given that rule. You understand? So a single rule could have many wisdoms behind it. It's like fasting, right? Or salah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He commands you to pray, salah, li dhikri. Or that salah prevents you from fahsha and munkar and baghi. It prevents you from lewd deeds, evil deeds, right? Or fasting, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, month of Ramadan, so you gain taqwa. So if these are the wisdom, if someone fasts, but he doesn't gain taqwa, he says, oh, I didn't gain taqwa. Can we say to him, oh, therefore, because you fasted, you didn't gain taqwa, you didn't reach or achieve the wisdom behind fasting, you don't have to fast. No, he still has to fast. It's still obligatory. Same with the salah. Even if someone is absent-minded in the salah, he doesn't remember Allah much, that salah is still fard on him. Even though the wisdom behind it was to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the salah is still fard, whether he achieves that wisdom or not. Right? It's more detailed explained in usul and things like that, but I'm just trying to put it in a plain and simple way. So similar here, if the wisdom is to check the pregnancy and allow that to happen, even if that changes the means by which you can do that, it doesn't mean the rule will change, because the rule is not solely based on this wisdom. There are other reasons behind it. Okay? The second wisdom behind this rule, they said, is to give time for the woman to grieve and not to be approached about remarriage immediately. So, a husband has passed away. She may be pregnant, she may not be, but they may have children, they may not. But it gives them adequate time, gives the woman adequate time to grieve or mourn her husband without being approached for marriage immediately. So this is another wisdom that's given. A third wisdom is to have a buffer between, and this is for all the waiting periods, not just the widow, even after divorce. Why do you have to wait 3 months, 3 cycles? So there is a buffer between the marriage of one woman to a husband to the next marriage to another husband. There is a buffer, there is a clean break, there is a gap. Otherwise, what would happen is one marriage ends, straight away another marriage starts. Apart from the first reason about pregnancy, that will be mixed up as well. There wouldn't be enough time to check. There'll be mix up in the biological identity of the child that is born. But it's to give that buffer so that marriage is something that is pure, something that is clear, something that there's no confusion in. There is a clear break between one marriage contract to another marriage contract. So there is this buffer for the woman. So it doesn't become a plaything where somebody's marriage starts 1 hour, next day finishes, next day another contract starts. No, there is a clear buffer and gap between. So these are some of the wisdoms that the scholars mention. In terms of the legal rules arising from this verse, first of all is the woman who is not pregnant or not known yet to be pregnant, the rule of the widow, how long does she have to wait if the husband passes away? What is the waiting period? It's 4 months and 10 days. This is the first rule, 4 months and 10 days. It's obligatory, it's a fard, it's a command. Any woman, any widow has to be in the waiting period. Iddah is 4 months and 10 days. Secondly, the woman who is known to be pregnant, right? If somebody is known to be pregnant at the time of the death of the husband, what is the waiting period then? The majority of scholars said that the waiting period is wad'ul hamal. So basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأُولَاتُ الْأَحْمَالِ أَجَلُهُنَّ أَن يَضَعْنَ حَمْلَهُنَّ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that those who are pregnant or who are carrying a child, their term or their fixed term is until they give birth, until they give birth the child. So a woman whose husband passed away, but she's pregnant, her ending waiting period will be until the time she gives birth. That may be after 6 months, that may be after 4 months, that may be after 5 months, whenever that is that's when the waiting period finishes. This is the view of the overwhelming majority of the ulama. Even if it's less than the 4 months and 10 days. There's an incident that's narrated in Abu Dawood. He says that Subay'a bint Harath, who says that she gave birth to a child 15 days after the death of her husband. So she was heavily pregnant, right at the end, towards the end of her pregnancy, and her husband passed away. So 15 days after her husband passed away, she gave birth. After giving birth, after taking rest, when she came out of her few days or few weeks, whatever time it was, then she started to apply a bit of makeup and came out well dressed. And somebody said to her, "Oh, you probably want to get married again." Well, you can't do that because you have to wait 4 months and 10 days. This is somebody quoting this verse to her, basically saying, because you're well dressed and you've put a little bit of makeup or something, or you're putting some or ornaments or cosmetics, it means you're probably looking for another husband, you want to get married again. But you can't do that. You're meant to wait 4 months and 10 days. Here she gave birth, within 15 days. So then this woman, Subay'a, she went to the Prophet ﷺ and told her that with what happened, and the Prophet ﷺ told her that she had finished her waiting period with the delivery of the child. So she was free to get married. And then the Prophet ﷺ advised her to get married if a good proposal came up. So because of that, the iddah period of the widow who is pregnant is until she gives birth. After that, according to the vast overwhelming majority of scholars, after that, her iddah period is finished. What is the iddah period? What are the rules within that period? What can a woman do? What can't she do? What are the rules? It's called ihdad, or mourning, grieving, What are the rules behind that? What is it? What does it mean? They said it's هو ترك الزينة والتطيب والخطاب وتعرض لأنظار الخاطبين. They said mourning is to leave off beautifying oneself, to leave off putting on good fragrance like perfume. It's also to leave off putting any makeup on, right? And it's also to avoid attracting the attention of people who may want to propose to you. These are the 4 things they said in the waiting period, in terms of mourning, officially mourning for the woman, for the widow. These are 4 things she has to not do. So she shouldn't beautify herself, she shouldn't put on perfume, or she shouldn't put on makeup, and she shouldn't present herself in front of others in such a way that would attract them basically for marriage, etc. These are basically what she cannot do, and this is for the whole 4 months and 10 days. 4 months and 10 days. And also this is proven from the saying of the Prophet ﷺ in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim, لا يحل لامرأة تؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر أن تحد على ميت فوق 3 إلا على زوج 4 أشهر. It is not permitted for a woman who believes in Allah and the last messenger and the last day. It is not permitted for the woman who believes in Allah and the last day to mourn for more than 3 days for any deceased, except for her husband. She should mourn for 4 months, meaning 4 months and 10 days. So for anyone who passes away, say the woman's father, brother, son, or any male relatives pass away, or anyone passes away from her relatives, she can only mourn for 3 days. That's the maximum. Meaning where she doesn't beautify herself, or she's in that state of mourning, if you like. Except for her husband. If he passes away, then she has to remain like that for 4 months and 10 days. What about leaving the house, going to work and things like that? A widow can leave the house during the daytime for things that she needs, things that are necessary. So, for example, if she has to work, if she was working and she needs to continue working, she's allowed to do this. If she has to support herself or her children or her family, she's allowed to do this, going out during the daytime to work, or going to any other things that she needs to do, which she can't get somebody else to do. She can go out and do those things. So there's not a blanket restriction that for 4 months, 10 days, you cannot leave your room or you can't leave your house. Some people mistake, I'll come to that, where the misunderstandings are. Does she have to stay in the deceased husband's house? Yes, the majority of scholars say she should stay in her husband's house, as long as that house is secure and it's his own house, they don't have to leave, it wasn't rented and then they have to move out. As long as it's a secure place for the next 4 months and 10 days, then she should stay there. Some scholars allowed her to spend the waiting period in her own house, but the majority say it should be in the husband's house as long as she can stay there without fear of being kicked out or something like that, or the property being taken away from her, etc. She doesn't have to wear a specific color of clothing. Some people in different cultures, different communities, you have to wear white or you have to wear black. No, she doesn't have to wear a specific color. Main thing is not to wear that type of clothing that will signify or that will cause attraction for marriage. Shouldn't wear bright colors or whichever culture it is. It doesn't have to be bright colors. These are very relative. One culture, this is attractive. Another culture, this is attractive. Depending which society you live in, she shouldn't wear clothing in a way that would attract marriage proposals, etc. This is the basic rule. But it doesn't mean she has to only wear black or she can only wear white. So these are the basic rules, and we should be careful not to add extra burdens on widows that Islam doesn't demand. Neither should we go to the other extreme where people don't observe most of these things, right? I think the elder generation, they're probably on the other side where they observe everything to the dot and maybe more, whereas maybe sometimes people who are not familiar with the rules, more of the next generation, younger generation, are not fully complying with some of the rules or don't take it as seriously. So we've got to strike the balance. Whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly has forbidden in the Qur'an or through the Sunnah, we should adhere to that, not add anything extra where Allah didn't say, or anything extra where the Prophet ﷺ didn't say. And we shouldn't burden widows extra beyond what the rules are there for their own protection and for their own space, etc. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and this is an important addition to it, فإذا بلغنا أجلهن فلا جناح عليكم فيما فعلن في أنفسهن بالمعروف والله بما تعملون خبير. However, when they have completed their fixed term, there is no sin upon you in what they do with themselves in a reputable manner. Allah is well aware of what you do. So the Quran leaves the issue of remarriage totally up to the woman. Totally up to the woman. فَإِذَا بَلَغْنَا أَجَلَهُنَّ فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِيمَا فَعَلْنَ فِي أَنفُسِهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. When they have completed their fixed time, there is no sin upon you. Why is it saying you? Because the guardian. There's no sin upon you, the guardian, the father, or the older brother. If they go and marry, or if they start, when the waiting period is finished, they can beautify themselves, they can dress smartly, they can wear different colored clothes or whatever. All the restrictions are lifted. And if they go and get married, there's no harm, there's no sin upon you, as in the guardians. So straight after the 4 months, 10 days, a woman is entirely free to get married again. Or straight after the delivery of her baby, of her child, she's free to go and get married again. And this is where, again, in certain cultures and communities, we come up with this issue and problem, where a widow, in some communities, they will stay a widow all their lives, especially if she's maybe over 40, 45. Hardly get married again. It's seen as something shameful, embarrassing. It's seen as something disloyal to the dead, deceased husband. It's seen as culturally taboo. And this is completely wrong. Allah subhanahu, if she decides to get married, look at the wording. فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْكُمْ. There's no sin upon you. فِيمَا فَعَلْنَا فِي أَنفُسِهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. فِيمَا فَعَلْنَا. In whatever she does, meaning whatever she decides to do, whether to stay single for 5 years and then get married, whether to stay single for 20 years, whether to get married the next hour, فِيمَا فَعَلْنَا فِي أَنفُسِهِنَّ. The only condition is بِالْمَعْرُوف. Do it in a decent way, with adab, according to what decent people, how they behave, etc. Just with ma'ruf, with decency, with an acceptable manner. But whether she gets married the next day, the next hour, after the waiting period is finished, is entirely up to her. Whereas some communities, some cultures see that as a complete no, especially straight after iddah period, impossible. But even afterwards, people discourage. But this is not the way. The Prophet ﷺ, what did he advise? After the woman gave birth, after 15 days, and then few days probably she stayed because of a child. But after that, he said, if you get a good proposal, get married. This is the advice of the Prophet ﷺ. So again, we shouldn't harm the widows in our communities. We shouldn't put obstacles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not put, that the Prophet ﷺ did not put. Islam is very easy. There are rules and regulations. But after that, it's very easy. It's up to you. This is a human need. If a woman in her 30s or 40s or even 50s wants to get married, it's entirely up to her. We should not stop her because of cultural taboo and cultural norms, much of which, especially Asian subcontinent, not talking about Middle East and Africa, I don't know what their norms are, but Asian subcontinent, a lot of that comes from other religions. It doesn't come from Islam. The negativity towards widows getting married again does not come from Islam. It comes from other cultures in the Indian subcontinent, comes from other religions. It's nothing to do with Islam. So it's very important that we understand this, we teach this to our children, our families, to our communities, not to harm women who want to get married after they've become a widow, or even after they've divorced or become divorced. Inshallah, just to summarize, so very quickly, that Allah, in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the ruling of the widow that she must observe the waiting period of 4 months and 10 days. There are certain regulations within that she must observe as mourning, not to beautify herself, not to attract, not to do anything that will attract proposals, and definitely she's not allowed to get married within that period. Next verse will deal with also proposals, how someone can propose if somebody's in the waiting period, what's the manner to do that, can they propose, can they not, that will be in the next verses. But these are some of the rules: no makeup, no beautification, to spend the nights in the home, in the husband's home, according to the majority. But if she's got needs, she can come out, go to work, go to appointments, whatever she needs to do, she can do. That's not a problem. No restrictions on that she has to wear a particular type of clothing, etc. And definitely after the waiting period is over, no restrictions in the clothing, meaning she doesn't have to wear a particular color. Main thing is that it shouldn't be as a normal dress outside of waiting period. It shouldn't be to attract anybody, etc., etc. And definitely after the waiting period is over, she is free to marry whoever she wants. She's free to marry whenever she wants, in that sense. And people should not create obstacles or barriers for women getting married, even if they're widows, as long as they've met all the conditions. And like I said, these questions will come up amongst the youth about, this waiting period, 4 months, 10 days. How comes the man doesn't have to wait? The woman has to wait 4 months, 10 days. Man can get married straight away. These questions will come. But like I said, we have to go back to the original purpose of Islam. We have to understand the source of Islam. We have to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first. If we understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the rest becomes easy. Then we have to understand the hikmah, the wisdoms behind some of these rulings. And then obviously we have to submit, and we have to explain to people properly in a manner which makes sense, in a way that makes sense, and in a way that is correct. Some rulings, there's some room for maneuver. Not all rulings are fixed in stone with no room for maneuver. Some rulings, in an aspect of it, there may be room for maneuver, there's flexibility. But if you don't know it, and you tell the people, no, this is haram, you can't, you're going to drive people away. So you have to know the rules, you have to know the different opinions, which ones are valid, which ones are not, where there's room for maneuver, according to situation. So inshallah, with this, we'll end it here today.